Hello, guys. Hope everybody had a good Christmas and you're getting ready for the new year. Personally, I can't wait for 2020 to be over with, that we can start 2021. I'm hoping that it's much better, but obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on out there that we have no control over. So we can just do what we can to make our own lives better and, kind of work on your small little world there. I wanted to let you guys know I'm back online doing live stuff. I don't know how long that's going to be, maybe to the end of the year, depends on how my trip to West Tech goes. But I wanted to let you know what I'm working on. I have two really good, I'm hoping that they're going to be good, two really good videos going up. One is I'm almost finished with the editing on a cool comparison. 4.6 liter 2-valve Ford versus 4.6 liter 4-valve Ford versus 4.8 liter LS. Now that's been suggested a lot because of the similarities in displacement between the 4.8 liter and the 4.6 liter. People wanted to see how well they kind of compared to each other. So not only did I do some NA comparisons between all of those, but we also showed some boosted comparisons, and really mostly between the 4.6 liter 4-valve motor and the 4.8 liter LS, because the 2-valve is a little bit of a disadvantage, I think. And we go over that in the video. It's just a little bit of a disadvantage from the standpoint of head flow. The 4.6 liter 4-valve flows pretty well, especially in ported form. Once you port any of those heads, whether it's an early B head or the later head, or even especially the 03 Cobra head, you can put lots of different choices on there and they all work very well, especially in ported form. If they're ported properly, you can get a lot of flow from that 4-valve head. So I've always found that the modified versions of a 4-valve motor can easily surpass the performance of a 4.6 liter 2-valve. Although I have to say, I do like the trick flow heads that they use on the 4.6 liter 2-valve stuff. That was a good step up, and I had been for years and years and years trying to stir the pot out there whenever I would do stories or talk to people about somebody stepping up and actually doing testing and doing an aftermarket version of the 4.6 liter 2-valve, because Ford made thousands and thousands and thousands of those motors, and they used them in a lot of stuff. And they just needed their own cylinder head, because the factory head, even imported form, was not bad. It was not terrible, but it still was nowhere near what it could be and what other things are, like the LS motor or obviously a 4.6 liter 4-valve. 351 Windsor for the win. Yes, Tom, we did. We had a good Christmas. We all stayed together, and it was really nice. But anyway, the 4.6 2-valve, 4-valve, 4.8 liter LS. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think is going to do the best there? Is it going to be is there any chance that the 2-valve can compete against the 4-valve? And what about the LS? Can the LS, is there enough cylinder head and enough power potential for the slightly larger 2-valve, 4.8 liter LS? Can it compete with the 4-valve stuff? Can it do it NA? Calgary, Alberta, nice, in the house. Can that 4.8 compete with the 4-valve 4.6 motor? And can they do it NA? Can they do it under boost? Let me know what you guys think. The other thing that I'm working on that should be really good, I got a lot of response from the 5.4 liter 4-valve versus the 5.3 liter LS. Again, similar displacement, so you can make good power, I think, with either one of those. They both have really good cylinder heads, and we showed that like 1,000 horsepower level stuff is very easy with either one of those. But that's a really popular one. It's also a very popular one for people to complain about, because it's not, we didn't go all out on our 5.4 liter 4-valve. And, obviously the Ford guys are complaining that there's plenty of power left in that potential. You could do a much better combination, which is probably true. And the 5.3 liter guys are, like the LS guys, it's inexpensive. It makes more power than everything else in the world. So it reigns supreme. So we get that from the other cool one that I have coming up that's going to follow the 4.6 liter stuff is, it's basically Coyote versus the world. So I modified a 5 liter Coyote motor. I did a ton of stuff to it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to compare a 5 liter Coyote, and this is a Gen 1 Coyote, with basically stock bottom end, heads, cam, intake manifold. And we'll compare that to actually 3 different LS motors. The closest one in displacement to the 5-liter Coyote obviously is the 4.8 liter. So I've got lots of modified 4.8 liter stuff, and I've got stock bottom end with heads, cam, and intake. So we can kind of see how the Coyote compares to the 4.8 liter. But the Coyote, obviously a 4.8 liter is a truck motor, and it was never designed to compete with a performance piece like a 4-valve Coyote motor, used in the Mustang. So what about we'll step up in displacement and compare it maybe to a 5.3 liter. Again, I have lots of modified 5.3 liter stuff that makes at various power levels, and we'll see how it compares to the 5.3. And then finally, we'll even step up to a 6 liter, and actually the 6 liter probably is closer in peak performance to the Coyote than either of the other two are. So it'd be an interesting comparison with all of those LS motors and comparing them to the power output of the Coyote. Then obviously we're going to have to ask the question about, what about the Big Bang? Is that what would happen if we did that on both of those combinations? Because and I touch on this in the video about the 4.6 liter stuff versus the 4.8. I don't think that in the very first Big Bang, we got 1,200 horsepower or a little over 1,200 horsepower, but I don't think that was all of it. I think that from the 4.8 standpoint, especially if I had a Gen 4 4.8 or a Gen 4 5.3 liter, and as we've shown with the Gen 4 6 liter, there's a lot of power potential there if it's done right. And, we did the 4.8 liter way back in 2010. That's really before almost anybody was doing this kind of stuff. But you can make a lot of power with that. And I think that we left a lot on the table. I think if we would have turned the boost up and ran and had an ice water, air to water intercooler, had better turbos on it than the CX Racing 76 millimeter stuff. And then, put a little more of a concerted effort into it rather than, hey, let's just see what happened, because that's how all of that turned out to begin with. I think we can get even more power because there's guys probably out there running 30, 40 pounds of boost with these things without any trouble. So if we have enough turbo to do that, and then we have turbos that are going to work at that pressure ratio, I think we can make a lot of power even with the 4.8. And obviously the other thing that I want to do, which we hadn't really almost any of the Big Bang thing, is we need to run more RPM too, because RPM is power, and we can get more and more power at the top, especially on the 4.8. We'll limit torque, which is the thing that kind of kills the rods on these stock bottom end deals, and we can make a lot of power. So both of those videos are coming up, which I think will be real popular with people. The Coyote guys want to see that, and the Coyote or the Ford Chevy thing and the Coyote LS thing is a natural rivalry, and the same thing with the 4.6 and the 4.8 stuff. I think those will be very popular because, guys like to, if nothing else, they like to complain about stuff, and there'll be plenty there for these guys to complain about. So let's see what we got, and that's what I have coming up. And then when I go down to West Tech, we have, I think I have a twin turbo versus a single turbo. I have the Buick stuff coming up, and we'll see if the L99, the 4.3 liter V8, the little LT1 stuff, if that is there, I can do some testing on that as well. But let's see what kind of questions we have for us on a Sunday night. Our very first one, Father Firefighter. Please tell me what the horsepower torque limit of the 96 to 98 4.6 or 4-valve rods and pistons are. I can't find the actual answer. I wish that I knew. That's one of the things that I go over in this video. Is I've never actually run a Big Bang on the 4.6 liter 4-valve motor. I've never done that. We've run stuff over 1,000 horsepower, but most of that testing was done on an 03 Cobra motor, which has forged internals in it. So it's already a really good piece to begin with. So I haven't done one with the standard rods. They all have steel cranks in them, so that's not going to get hurt. It's usually a rod or a piston that lets go, and I've never done a ring gap and just find out how much power the stock rod and piston will take. So I can't answer that just yet. I can tell you that it's not 400 horsepower like people used to tell me that the 2-valve rods would break at and the pistons and stuff. It's not there. It's much, much higher than that. 72 Ventura 383 would like to see a Big Bang test on an 03, 04 Terminator Cobra 4-valve motor. I would too. I've run stuff over 1,000 horsepower on the crate motor that we had and without had any problem. The reason that I won't do a Big Bang on the 03 Cobra motor, there's two reasons really. One is that you'll never find one in a wrecking yard. I mean, I've never seen one. you see them for sale occasionally. They're usually more expensive, but they're usually not runners. But the other reason is that they have forged internals from the factory. It'd be like doing a big bang on an LS9 combination. And I just, because that's so limited and so specialized, I don't think that that's what the average guy is going to get. And I'd be much more interested in doing big bang stuff on the powdered metal rod stuff and the cast piston stuff to show what they'll do. Because a Terminator motor like an LS9 is, already an upgraded piece. It might be interesting to find out. The thing that I don't know about the LS9, I bring that up. I know that the 4.6 4-valve, the aluminum block on those are really strong. You can make a million horsepower with those. I don't know about the aluminum block on the LS9. If anybody knows, let me know. We know that the L33 stuff is really strong. I don't usually try to make a lot of power on an LS1, 2, or 3 block, but maybe the LS9 is much stronger. I know that the internals are, but I just don't know about the block. So if you guys do, let me know. I just haven't had any experience. I've never run one of those modes. Never run an LSA or an LS9. Crank and Wagon, I think it would be interesting to test the undersized, proper size, and too large size turbo on the same engine. You can do that. Are you talking about the hot side being undersized, proper size, and too large size, or the compressor, or both? Just let me know. Playboy's Cool Vids, 4-valve is the best. 2-valve has no chance. It'll be interesting to see what the 4-valve versus the LS is. More non-LS stuff will always be good. A to Z Preps. Richard, do you offer consultation services for pay? Well, if you have a question, just ask me, and it doesn't cost you anything. If I have an answer to the question, that's cheap. And there's lots of videos up on the site that tell you if you want to build something for a particular power output. I certainly can tell you what I've run before that's made that power usually, and that covers most all of the engine families. I've run a lot of stuff, certainly all the popular stuff. Michael Allen wants to see a 4.6 valve versus a 4.6 valve Big Bang. I've run boost on 4.6 valves. We've run blower stuff on them. We run turbos on them, but not the all of it boost kind of thing. I liked 3-valve when it came out because it had something that the 2-valve didn't have. It had more head flow, which is good. And it had a fairly good intake manifold too, which I liked. Boost is my friend. I made 822 wheel horsepower on a cammed 275,000 mile 4.8 with an S488 years ago, the T56. See, that's good. That's right in the, that's 900 or 925 or something like that at the flywheel. That's good power. That's kind of where we were. You'll see that's about where we are on this test when we compared the 4.6 valve and the 4.8 liter. I've never done a 4.6 liter 2-valve Big Bang test. We've done 1,000 horsepower with one, but it was a modified version. Tom wants to know what the maximum boost is for an eBay GT45. The boost level is a function of the displacement of the motor and the power output of the NA motor. I don't know if you put that on a small enough motor that you could make 30 pounds on it, but maybe you could. There's no map for it, so I have no way of knowing how efficient that thing is or where it wants to run at. Any 5.4 liter 2-valve in the future? I haven't done too much 5.4 liter 2-valve testing other than the Lightning stuff. I did a lot of Lightning stuff with the guys at Kenny Bell, and that worked out really well. And obviously upgrading the Eaton supercharger to a more efficient twin screw worked out very well. And obviously a bigger size too, because you're limited ultimately on a positive displacement blower by the amount of blower that you have. It it's a given, it's a fixed size. And so you have a given amount of RPM that you can run the thing. And after you do that, that's basically all of it. You can improve the inlet flow by having a big throttle body or porting it and do those kinds of things. But ultimately, your best bet is to just put a bigger blower on. And in the case of twin screw, you're putting a bigger, better blower on. So not only can it support more airflow and more power, but it does so more efficiently at a lower charge temperature and with less parasitic loss. Ken wants to know, can you use two different cams in the 4-valve Fords, like the exhaust the same and the intake the same? Would that hurt or help torque? You could mix and match different intake cams, I guess, and different exhaust cams. Although what you're going to get is one side of the motor making a different power curve than the other side of the motor, which we often get from the factory because the cam timing is so far off. We'd had it be 8 or more degrees off from one side to the other. So that will definitely change what the power output is on each side of the motor's doing. So that'd be similar to that. Gil wants to know what cam for a 4.8 with 7,500 RPM boosted E85, stock oil pump, or needs to be upgraded. The stock oil pump is fine. You can put a different pump in it if you like. The cam is not really, you could, with a 4.8 liter, you could use lots of cams that will get you to 7,500 RPM. A rising boost curve will get you to 7,500 RPM, or a short runner intake will get you to 7,500 RPM. There's lots of guys out there, Texas Speed or Brian Tooley or Comp. All of those guys can tell you what kind of camshaft. Just let me know what power you want, and is this thing going to be what turbo are you running and what kind of power output that you want. That will give us an idea what turbo you should use and what cam you should use. Mark Martinez, what is a good way to learn to clean up stock 5.3 LS pistons? Why do you want to clean the tops of them? You can scrub them with, we use really, really light, fine sandpaper. You can do that. And then we've even polished them when they're new so that they're mirror finished so that we don't get buildup on them. But that was just for Engine Master stuff and some things that we were trying. I don't know that it's necessary. Actually, there's an argument to be made. If you have carbon buildup on it, that raises the compression. A Hot Mess wants to know if I've run across an LS4 in my Church of the Yard. Actually, I have not. I've not seen a transverse mounted LS motor. I know that they're in the Grand Prix and the Monte Carlos and stuff. I just haven't seen it in the yards that I've been at, because I would have stopped and admired and oohed and awed and done video of it, because that would have been kind of cool, because it would have been unique for me because I hadn't seen any. I mean, obviously I know that they make them, but I've not seen any in my adventures to the wrecking yard. Ryan wants to know, have you ever tried a Holley mid-rise on a Turbo 4.8? I have a pair of GT45s going on a 4.8 looking to make 1,000 horsepower. You should stay with the stock truck manifold on your 4.8 and not go to a mid-rise unless you've already bought it. Then you can use it and it will work. But it loses power compared to the truck manifold, and you will be able to light the turbos off better with a long runner truck manifold than you will with a mid-rise. Eric wants to know, I have a stock LQ4 in my Silverado with a tune. What would be a good route to bump up power while not losing fuel economy? Long tube headers can do that, and actually the right camshaft can do that also. Paul said he broke an 01 Cobra at 480 wheel horsepower. We've run them higher than that, but I haven't done I just haven't done a stock one with a ring gap and tried to maximize it. But we've run them higher than that on the chassis dyno, stuff that I've done with Kenny Bell before. Yeah, Van says they've run a 97 464 valve with a Vortec on it, making 500 wheel horsepower. We've done on a stock 4.6 liter 2-valve motor. We've done 650 or 660 at the flywheel with it had cams in it. and it might have had ported head too, and a Vortec on it, but a stock bottom end. I didn't even change the ring gap on that one, and we've been in the mid 600s at the flywheel. One guy wants to know, are dual GT28 RS turbos with the 0.8 exhaust housing too small for a 4.8 with an LS9 cam? It depends on the power output you're running. Looking to run 15 pounds, hopefully hit 600. It won't take 15 pounds for you to hit 600 horsepower with a 4.8 with an LS9 cam in it. That will happen at a lot lower power output than that. I mean, at a lot lower boost level than that. Dentel Reed, what's the max power made on stock LM7 springs? The only time I've ever run a stock LM7 spring is with a stock LM7 cam. We have run that with a turbo, and I think we've run 600 or 650 or something like that, only because we were doing it as a baseline for doing a camshaft upgrade. But it's a good idea to upgrade those springs for two reasons. One, the stock LM7 or spring that's on a 706 head, those very small truck springs, are very light to begin with. They're the weakest spring of the LS family. And also, my guess is if you got them from a wrecking yard, they probably have like, 200,000 or 300,000 miles on them. So they're going to be even weaker than they would be normally. So it's not a bad idea. At least put an LS3 spring on it, and that will be a decent upgrade. This size turbo for my 464 valve. I'm looking to make 1200. Two of the GT45s will do 1200. Unity Motorsports Garage, a 2V can be made to run. You made over 600 horsepower NA, and a nitrous we've run low fives in the eighth. A 600 horsepower NA 2 valve, a 4.6 liter. I would really like to see that. Nick Nasty, any truth behind a throttle body blade ramping air upwards and sending more air into the back runners on certain manifolds? I'd have to envision the manifold to see if I thought that was possible. But I don't know what intake you're specifically talking about. Donnie wants me to do a Taurus SHO 3.4 liter V8. I've driven those before, and I really like the car. I did some instructing at Sears Point back when it was Sears Point with that car, and we used to take people for rides around, and that was a fun. I like that little motor. It was pretty cool. Pat wants to know if a 5.3, I'm assuming you mean de-stroked like the 6 liter. Yes, it can be. You can put a 4.8 crank in it, or you could just go buy a 4.8, because that's what a de-stroked 5.3 would be. It would be a 4.8 if you're talking about using the factory crank. Leighton wants an update on my COVID crisis. Nobody in the family caught that, so nobody in our family did. We have others that did, unfortunately, but we did not, so we're all good. Five for Joe wants to know, have you ever heard of a 4.8 bored out to 3.898? Yeah, LS1 bore size. We actually go even a little bit farther than that. You can bore it out to 3.905, and you can also put a 4-inch stroke in it, and that's how we make a 383. But if you put the standard 4.8 stroke in it, you can bore it out to that size because there are pistons available for that, or you can use a factory piston. You could also put a 5.3 crank in it, and then it would be a 5.7. But with a 4.8 crank, it would be smaller than a 5.7. What's the best value cam for a Turbo 5.3? I don't know what you mean by that. I would the best question that you can ask is, how can I make a specific amount of power? And that would be determined by your cam choice and your turbo choice. And almost any camshaft, even a stock LS6 or LS9 or LS3 or LS2, can usually get you to a very, very high power output. So you don't even have to have an aftermarket cam. You can have a stock one, a used one that a lot of guys are selling for cheap or even giving away. The 454 Big Bang has not taken place yet. What's the most horsepower made on an LM7 706 head? Dentel Reed. It depends on whether you're asking turbocharged or supercharged or NA. I don't know what that question is. There are lots of guys out there that are using stock heads and running a lot more boost on them than I ever have. We did ported heads on the Big Bang motors because I wanted to try to maximize the power output, and that's how you do it. You make lots of NA power and then start adding boost to that. But you can also do that with a stock 706 head. There are guys running way north of 1,000 horsepower on a stock head, and that's very easy to do. Yeah, Tim. Yeah, you're just showing up now. I see. Where's the love? Salvador wants to know, how much wheel horsepower do you think a 4.8 with a BTR Stage 4 cam and a TorqueStorm supercharger will make on the dyno? Well, a TorqueStorm supercharger is a good about 700 horsepower supercharger. So we've made a little more than that with some combinations with a really powerful NA combination. And I don't know which stage 4 cam you're talking about, but about 700 horsepower is kind of where you'll be. You might get to 740 or 50 if you really turn that thing up, but that's kind of where that supercharger will want to run. Joseph wants to know, can you tell us the formula for injector pounds to horsepower? Yeah, if you take on a V8, if you multiply the flow rate of the injector in pounds per hour times 16, that'll tell me how much power those injectors will feed NA. Manny has a 6-liter with a 4L80 in his Chevelle. What's the cheapest budget way to make 500 horsepower? Well, a 6-liter should make 500 horsepower. I'm assuming you have 317 heads on. If you put a cam in it, it'll make 500 flywheel horsepower if you put the right cam in it. Headers and a cam will easily do that. Obviously, you have to do springs as well. And there are ways to get more than that if you put the right cylinder heads on it, the right intake manifold. And I have 6-liter cam tests and stuff up on the channel right now to show you what kind of power we made with a heads, cam, and intake on a 6-liter. You can get up like 575, I think, on the LY6 that we did with trick flow heads and a decent camshaft and a fast manifold. But if you just put a camshaft in it, I think you should probably get near 500 with a stock head. And even better if you've got some inexpensive takeoff LS3 heads or LY6 heads or those kind of things. That's a good upgrade also. A to Z preps. Looking to run high 4s in the 8th and a 3,200 pound car with the AC on. I would start with something really, really big then. I would go with a big motor. Must be dependable. Sure, we all want them to make 1,500 horsepower. They have to get 50 miles to the gallon. They have to be dependable and overheat and yada, yada, yada. That's really hard to do. Vans wants to know if you found inch and 7/8 headers hurt power on a stock or a mild 5.7 or 6.0. I haven't seen that. I just don't see a big difference in power. And the interesting thing when you're running inch and 7/8 headers versus inch and 3/4 headers is everybody thinks that the big change is to be in the peak power. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the bigger header actually adds low speed power, which is interesting. And then they kind of dip away from each other and then they come back, and usually it's fairly comparable. It can be very comparable at the top. So, but one thing that's not going to happen, and I've had people tell me, oh yeah, you're going to pick up 30 horsepower going to inch and 7/8 header. I've never seen that. The Nova's coming along fine. I haven't worked on it very much. I need to get down to Westex so I can figure out when I can bring that thing down. Okay, let's go down here. Let's go down to the bottom. Let's go down where all the people are. Is there any way you can get variable valve timing on a 462 valve? That'd be interesting. I like variable cam timing. Has anybody here ever run a variable cam 5.3, like a Gen 4 motor? Does the factory make a 5.3 variable cam? If they don't, has anybody ever tried to adapt it if the factory doesn't make one? I'm not sure about all of the designations on the 5.3 on the Gen 4 stuff. I know we see that on 6-liter stuff and 6.2, and it's a good way to get. On a 6-liter NA, would you go with an LS3 head or stick with a cathedral port head? It depends on what you want to do. An LY6 head, which is going to be cheaper than an LS3 head, because for some reason people think that LS3 stuff is worth more money. Maybe it's because of the different valves that they use. But putting those rec port heads on a 6-liter, it will make more power than any of the other factory cathedral port heads. So if that's what you want to do, it will lose a little bit of power below 4,000 RPM, but it will make more power above that. And it's better than any of the factory heads. It's not as good as a really good set of cathedral port heads, like a Trickflow 225 or a ported set of 799s or 243s. So there's lots of ways to go there to get power, but it's fairly cheap usually to find a set of used LS3 or LY6 heads. James wants suggestions on the best way to run an LS with a turbo and a 64 Thunderbird. Yeah, you can run it either with the factory EFI setup if you're just doing a complete swap, or you can run it with an aftermarket EFI setup like the Holley and an HP or a Terminator X. I guess I haven't used that yet, so we're still doing HP and Dominator. But you can do that, a fast. There are other Mega Squirt. There's lots of possibilities to control the motor. That's actually fairly easy. You could also run it with a carburetor and an MSD ignition controller, and that's fairly easy as well in a 64 Thunderbird. What's the best mod to start with on a 4.3-liter V6, 1995, a TBI? You're a little bit limited in that, but I think that the thing that's missing mostly are cams. I might start with headers and see if that helps, and then if you're willing to take it apart, you can put a camshaft in it. Tom wants to know, how can I make 800 horsepower on my H22? A GT45. A GT45 is 800 is going to be absolutely all of it. And if it's going to do it on something, an H22 would be a good application. Although you would want to have that H22 make better NA power, because it's going to take a lot of boost to get there. And I'm not sure what the compressor on a stock H22, you have to run so much boost that it's just not going to be efficient there. The thing that I like about the H22 is that you're not going to have a lot of back pressure, so you don't have to worry about that. But an 800 horsepower is about the flow limit of that compressor. Maybe you can do something, put a radius entry on it or do that kind of thing. But an H22 with cams in it probably would be a good idea, something that gets that motor to make more power. The PRC 5.3-liter heads, I don't think are hurting you. We've tested those before, way back, and they flowed pretty well. So they should make they should make pretty good power. Do I think that the LT direct injection engines will be as popular and as cheap as the LSs in the future? I think that that's possible. I think that we run into problems. The DI stuff has its own problems that are, I don't know if guys are going to want to overcome that. And one is the fuel system, not so much the DI deal, but if everybody wants to add turbos to an LS, that's a fairly easy thing to do. It's turbos and injectors, cam springs, whatever. That's a little harder deal. And the thing is, with a DI motor, it's more expensive. So getting injectors for the DI, a pump, the cam lobes, there are various ways that you can increase the fuel flow, but it's not cheap. So if they have affordable alternatives, I think that would make it a lot more popular. Otherwise, I think that people are just going to continue with this Gen 3 and Gen 4 stuff. Hugh said he's been hoping for a 4.6 or two valve Big Bang motor. He's heard that they are weak. Well, guys told me that they would only make 400 horsepower and then they would break. But, after 600 and 700 horsepower stuff, we found that that's not the case. Now, I don't know where that limit is, but, everybody said that long ago about the LS and Hondas and everything else that we've tried on, small block Chevys, everything else that we've tried it on. When everything is right, you don't hurt it. But there is a limit somewhere. And unfortunately, I don't know what it is on the 4.6 liter yet. We did use LS9 head gaskets on 5.3s. It's better, obviously, on a 6 liter, but it still seals. And no, LS3 heads will not work on a 5.3. The valve's too big and the valve placement is wrong, and it will hit that bore size. Do I have any experience with a Toyota 4AG motor? Yeah. Did you see the video that I put up on the 4AG? It was really cool. It had stack injection on it and cams and stuff. Now, I didn't do any of the tuning on that. Eric from Westech did, but I really like those motors. I liked them since back in the Atlantic days, and I think that they're awesome. I myself, as much as I like the NA ones, and I like that the guys are running them like that, I certainly would do a turbo on it. That's the motor that I want to put in if I ever strike it rich and I'm able to buy a Nash Metropolitan, which is, I want a Nash Metropolitan convertible. That's the motor that I would put in. I would put that and a Toyota 5-speed in it. Not because I'd want to go fast. I just really like the way that they look. I know that they're reliable, they're cool, and it would have more than enough power for everything that I would want to do in the little Nash Metropolitan. What's in the tubes? Those are just rolled up. Those are just backdrops. So those are things that I filmed with. Big Bang on an old school Ford G63 would be sweet. Now the Ford G63, are you talking about the Mitsubishi? Isn't that the Eclipse motor or the Evo motor? Or am I still thinking Toyota? What's the smallest turbo you consider running on a 4.8 liter? The turbo sizing is all dependent on your power. If you only want, you could put a GT35 on there, although the hot side would have to be fairly good size, and that's like a 500 horsepower turbo, but it could work if you had a big enough hot side. Is it worth going to a Darton MID 3.7 bore on an iron 5.4 block? See, I wouldn't go with the big bore. I would keep the bore size the same. If you take a look at what Mahovitz does on all his 4.6 stuff, I don't think he goes more than about 5 or 6 over on his stuff, because he wants the wall strength. He's not trying to, the turbos and stuff are basically doing all the work. So he's not worried about having a big bore. I would shy away from a big bore on a turbo application. Where do you think people who blow up the 4.6 at 450 horsepower are going wrong? I think that they're detonating it. I think that it's, it's probably timing or something. Have you seen carbon pitted 5.3 pistons? Yeah, we've seen pistons that have taken abuse. I haven't seen them pitted unless it's, I guess it could be rust or something. Although it's an aluminum piston, I don't know how you get that in there. I have not played with the Nissan V6s, the VG30Es and DEs. Some of them on the chassis dyno, we've run those, but not on the engine dyno. I've never run one on the engine dyno. Yeah, the 4G63 in the Evo and Eclipses and stuff. I've done lots of chassis dyno stuff with those, and I almost bought an Eclipse about 2 months ago, I guess. A guy down that knows Mark Sanchez had one, and I was thinking about buying it, but the problem is, since it's California, I have all these things that I would want to do to it, and we just really can't unless it's an out-of-state car or something where we can register it somewhere else. But I just, I would like to just maybe, I guess, get a stock one and drive around, but how much fun is that? That's why I have the Nova, because it's pre-smog, so we can do lots of stuff to it. We boost a 5-liter Mercedes-Benz V8. I think some of the factory ones came boosted already. They would be cool to run, but again, running it on the dyno and getting it hooked up is a lot of work for something that we've never run before. FFH, a 500 horsepower NA motor with a turbo rated at 500 horsepower, is that adding to the engine or is this choking it? It's going to keep it the same. What's going to happen is the turbo can supply 500 horsepower. If the motor makes 500 horsepower, the turbo can supply the amount of air that the motor can use. But below that point, below that power peak, let's say, and this is a theoretical combination because you never know what the actual match is. But what will happen more than likely is the turbo will be able to make boost below that peak number. So it could add boost and add power everywhere below that. So let's say it goes up to 500 horsepower and just maintains 500 horsepower from 3,000 to 6,000 RPM, let's say. So what would happen is you'd add a ton of torque down low, and it will just always stay at 500 at 0 pounds of boost. That's the theoretical thing. That probably is not actually going to happen, but it would be something like that. That's what happens when the turbo runs out of airflow. The boost just drops off because it can't supply that boost level at that flow level and that power level. Josh, you could my email is on this channel. You can send me if you want to send me a question, you can. Are there any plans with the LT engines on the dyno, staging injectors with injection along with DI? What I want to do actually is convert one just so that it is port injection like L83. I'd like to just go to port injection so I could do all the stuff that I want to do with it and not have to worry about the DI stuff. Richard, you need financial backing and start selling your own. Start selling my own what? Team Shinoda wants to know my opinion of the 3-valve. I've done lots of 3-valve testing and even made my own 3-valve intake manifold, which worked very well. We ran it NA and we ran it boosted. It was a cool tubular kind of looking deal. And I like the 3-valve because the 3-valve head flowed a lot more than the 2-valve head did. So it was a big step up. I like the fact that it had variable cam, so you could have even more potential power. But I think that they had some issues with spark plugs. There's some other things, and then they went away from that. So the Coyote was a really good upgrade from the 3-valve to the Coyote, and it makes a million more horsepower than the 3-valve. But you can certainly make a lot more power. You can make more power with a 3-valve, I think, than the 2-valve. but maybe just not as much as the 4-valve. Do you think you push an LT engine as farther on the LS? I've never seen anybody do anything on an LT engine that we've done on the LS. I'm not saying you can't. I just have never seen anybody do it. The thing that I'm worried about on the LT engine is the piston design is designed for direct injection. It's designed specifically to induce swirl and create mixture motion. And I don't know how susceptible to detonation that piston is when you run it with port injection as opposed to direct injection. Because the direct injection, you worry less about detonation because the fuel isn't ejected until the very last second. There's not a lot of time for pre-ignition to happen. So I just don't know about the piston design and its susceptibility to detonation with port injection. I guess it's something we'd have to find out. Yeah, Tim said that the Gen 5 engine ECU can be broken to use a map sensor. We've run it as a speed density already on the engine dyno. We've run the factory ECU and not had to run a MAF on it. We've run it as a speed density deal, and that works fine. We just wanted to be able to see the throttle body open and close without having the air intake and stuff on it to make sure that it was staying at wide open throttle for the whole run and that it wasn't employing what we call countermeasures to stop us from getting full throttle. Yeah, a back 40, I agree. You'd like to see a test on a Pontiac 250 overhead cam sprint engine. I think those are really neat, and that would definitely be super cool other guys' stuff. Smoke and Choking 173, 352 cubic inches, cast pistons, 035 gap, 9-to-1 static compression, idle to 5,000 with the emphasis on low end. A GT45 is a good choice for, 352 inches. The GT45 should still work. Get the biggest hot side that you can. And as long as you're not trying to run a lot of, it's got to be, let's say, sub 700 horsepower. And it's going to be pretty responsive, I think, on that combination. On a 96 4.6 liter 4-valve Cobra, how much nitrous will it hold? We've run 200 shots with the Cobra motors a lot, and we've run even more than that on the 03 Cobra stuff. We've run 150 shots on top of the blower to, intercool it. Actually, we just wanted to have, a compound set up, a dual power adder thing, and it worked really well. Do you think I can swap my 4.6 2-valve, my 07 Vic for a 4-valve and get away with it and smog it in California? I'm not the guy to ask smog questions. I don't know. I know that this sounds like it's not legal, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm just not familiar with all the smog laws. Kunal's got a 4.6 2-valve with a Kenny Bell, making 400 horsepower. And it looks bone stock from the outside. See, that's going to be a fun car. I had a Kenny Bell on my 98 2-valve, a non-PI version that we did some things to, and it worked out really good. Team Shinoda wants to know if I've ever put a turbo on a 460 Ford. I have not, but we're putting one on a 429 Ford that my buddy Mark Sanchez has, and we will run at that. But a 460, putting a turbo on a 460 is no different than putting a turbo on any other motor, a Cadillac or a Buick or Chevy or whatever. It doesn't, if you get all the exhaust to the turbo and you get the boost going in and you get the timing and fuel right, it all just works out really well, even on a 460. We've run blowers in the past on 460s, and that, they respond just like every other motor does. Michael wants to know, are you aware of the 540 rat blog on motor oil? It states that thinner oil without zinc is better than thicker oil with lots of zinc. What do you think about that? I think it depends on what you're trying to do with the zinc. I think that the oil viscosity and lack of zinc or presence of zinc are two different things. I don't think you substitute one of those for the other. Is there a certain cam you run on a supercharged 408 LS? It depends on your power level and what the rest of your things are as to what camshaft I would pick. But I probably would not pick a supercharged cam. I would probably pick an NA camshaft for that. And again, it depends on what supercharger you're running. Yes, Tim, an RB25 and the Nova would definitely be super cool. Yes, Richard, I'm familiar with Matt's 8-for-8 deal. Although he wasn't able to do it for 8,000, it ended up costing him more than that. But it's still really cool. I mean, it's amazing. And I tried to talk him into not doing it with a 4.8. I told him he needed to do it with a 5.3 because it would be a lot easier to make the power. But he wanted to do it with a 4.8. So God bless him. That's awesome because it makes life even harder because that sloppy stage 2 cam is really big in a 4.8 and it makes it harder to spool the turbo and you have to get the stall speed right and all that. So it would be easier. And you could get from the wrecking yard, a 5.3 costs the same amount as a 4.8. So, but he likes the 4.8 and that's good. He does good stuff over there. He's really good at tuning and stuff. And so if you have tuning questions, especially if it's factory ECU stuff, he would be a really good guy to ask. I've never, and somebody asked if I would ever tested the LSA supercharger on a 4.8 or 5.3 or 6.0, and I have not. I've never run factory LSA supercharger. Brian wants to know what I think about the old Powerdyne superchargers. Well, I know the guy that started the company, and we used them quite a bit back in the day, and I know what the impeller designs do. So they're good for lower boost levels and lower power levels. The belt was always could be problematic, especially for hard accel and decel stuff. But the blowers were good for back in the day. Sparky Moto. I'd like to see you do a live stream on top of cutting and welding up 2 LS blocks to make a V12. Yeah, those guys have done that. Crankin' Wagon. Yes, I have seen the 8 turbos on that. I think that's really cool. He has commented on some of the stuff on some of the videos that I've done, and I would like to talk to him because I think that's super cool. We've been planning on doing that on the engine dyno for several years now, and I just have not got around to it. I actually am going to maybe do something different than that. I originally kind of wanted to do that where we had a single turbo for each cylinder, and I think that'd be really cool. But what I want to do now is I just want to be able to, well, we'll talk about that later. Somebody else will go do it if I tell them what I want to do. I don't have any, the question is, do I have any experience with boosting a 4.6 or a Ford V6, a 3.8 liter or 4.2 liter? The only one that we've done is the 3.8 liter in the Super Coupes, but not, and I've done a few of those. We've done blower upgrades and intercooler upgrades and those kinds of things, but not the 4.2 liter and not turbos on any of those. Yeah, Richard, I agree. If you tell Matt over at Sloppy that he can't do something or that he shouldn't do something, then that eggs him on to actually do it. Jacob wants to know if the LS1 would be considered an other guy's motor. He doesn't see many LS1s turboed making more than 500 or 600 horsepower. An LS1 should easily make more than that. I mean, there's an LS1 up on the channel that made almost 600 horsepower NA. So it's an LS1 is the same as all the other ones. I just don't like the aluminum block that they use in that for making, really big power, but 1,000 horsepower or less stuff. Guys have done that. .500 horsepower NA, 1,500 horsepower at 30 pounds, boost in E85. Would it be best to run dual injectors? We didn't run dual injectors, and we don't run dual injectors on the Big Bang stuff. We run single injectors, but you certainly can. But if you're never driving around at 1,500 horsepower, so that's where dual injectors come in. Unless you want to size them so that you have a small one and you can get good drivability. And that's obviously all of that stuff is possible. Hydrolock wants to know, would an LM7 with an M90 and a GT45 combo setup make any power? Yeah, it would make what the GT45 is capable of making, which is about 800 horsepower if it's all in. Mike R, everyone says I can't get 400 wheel horsepower NA out of my 4.6 liter. You can certainly do that on a 4-valve, and I think that's possible on a 2-valve if it's done right. The stuff that I did is 10 years ago or more now, but I think that that's certainly possible. We made 300 with a non-PI motor, 300 at the tire, but it took me doing a custom intake manifold to make that happen. But I think on a PI motor, I think that that's certainly possible. What transmission is going into the Nova? Well, right now it has the 3-speed manual trans, and that's what's going to go in there with the 292 inline 6-cylinder. After that, probably a 200 4R. Frankie wants to know, what are your thoughts on an LQ4 40 over and a 4100 crank? I would not use a 4100 crank, especially with boost. A 4100 crank is way too long. It brings the piston down out of the hole. You don't need that displacement to make power out of a turbo LQ4, as evident by the 1,500 horsepower that we made on the Big Bang motor. That was an LY6, but it's basically an LQ4. It's the same thing. So you can make more than enough power with a 6-liter. And if you were doing a stroker and you wanted to do a 408, then do that. I wouldn't do a 4100 crank. I'd do a 4-inch crank, and I don't like going any bigger than that with the stock sleeve length. R3 drum, red drum. That's good. Can I build a Gen 4 reliable 1,000 wheel horsepower and a C6 for less than $4,000 as a long block? Well, a junkyard motor with the cam and springs is a lot less than that, and it will certainly do 1,000 wheel horsepower if you do a 5.3. So I would say yes, and you could do that even as a long block. You don't need for 1,000 wheel horsepower. You don't need ported heads, so you could do it with stock heads. You could even do it with forged rods and pistons. I would use the stock crank and I would use the stock block. I don't think I'd use an LS1 block. I think I'd use an iron block or use an L33 aluminum block, and then yeah, that's not a problem. And especially if you don't even need forged rods and forged pistons if you're doing a Gen 4. If you have Gen 4 rods and Gen 4 pistons, ring gap on a L33, and then, use the stock head, springs, right cam, boost. That shouldn't be a problem. Yes, Crank-A-Wagon. I've seen the 8 turbo stuff on Boosted Lifestyle. That's really neat. Red Drum wants to know if that would really be reliable for 1,000 wheel horsepower. Well, I can tell you that I don't have one out running around at that power level, and I'm not driving it, so I can't tell you for sure. There are lots of guys out there doing it that are racing it and making that happen. I can tell you that like the Big Bang 6-liter that did 1,500 horsepower and has done hundreds of runs at the 1,000 horsepower level is still live and still works. And as long as the tune is right and everything is right, it should be reliable at that power level. And other people are out running that. You're not going to daily drive it at the 1,000 horsepower level, and you're not going to be using 1,000 wheel horsepower on the street unless you're doing roll racing or something, because you're not going to have traction for that. If you take it to the drag strip once in a while, you can make that kind of power. But my question is, do you have the other stuff needed for 1,000 wheel horsepower car? Because you have to have quite a bit of transmission and quite a bit of rear end and drive shaft and axles and all that stuff too. Epic Scandinavian wants to know, and I have to get going. This is my last question. What power is the L33 block good for? It is good for as much power as you can put to it, because you're going to break something else in that motor before you break that block. So there are guys running 35, 40 pounds of boost on an L33, just like we do on an iron block, an LM7 or an LR4 block. You can make lots and lots of power with an L33. The block is not the limiting factor. Chris, all I need is a Mopar 2.2 with 80 pounds boost. Oh, here's one other thing I wanted to mention to you guys, and please let me know. I'm looking for photos. I need some photos on a couple of cars. One, if anybody knows any photos, and I don't want just photos stolen off the internet. I need to be able to use these in video, so I don't want to take somebody else's property. So if anybody else out there knows somebody that owns these cars and has photos of them or can get me photos on them, I want photos of a Mazda 323 GTX. Everybody should know what that is. If you don't, you're going to, because I'm going to do a video on it. So Mazda 323 GTX is one car. The next car is a Dodge Omni GLHS. Everybody should know what that is. If you don't, I'm going to do a video on it. A Dodge Omni GLHS, a Mazda 323 GTX. And then I had one more car that I wanted to do a story on. The other one is I need photos on a 3rd gen RX-7, the twin turbo, which in my opinion, arguably is one of the best looking Japanese cars like ever to be produced. Maybe second only to the Toyota back in the James Bond movie, which I think was a 2000. So I need those 3 cars. I need a Mazda 323 GTX. I know a Pulsar GTR. That's coming. Don't worry. I like the Pulsar and the Peugeot 205. So when I go through my Group B phase here, we'll get to some of those cars too. Mazda 323 GTX, Dodge Omni GLHS. Could be a GLH2, but a GLHS would be ideal. And then a 3rd gen RX-7. What I'm looking for are exterior photos, 3/4 front shots that look pretty. Engine shots, obviously, ideally anything in the engine that's really cool. The intake manifold, the turbo, the intercooler, that kind of stuff. If there's interior, I need stuff so that I can put together video. Renault Fuego, yes, definitely. That's a giant yes. Those things ran in showroom stock and did very well back in the day when they're running those in showroom stock. But I want to talk about lots of different cars that I like, and I want to talk about the history of them, and I want to go over that stuff. So those are 3 cars that I want to do. There are going to be more, obviously, and we're going to start integrating that into the new stuff in 2021. So thank you guys for all of your help. If you have that, information and you can get me that information, that would be awesome. I'll put my email address up, so if you guys can send me photos or get me in contact with somebody that does have these, a CSX or dope. They can put me in contact with that to get me that information. Again, Mazda 323 GTX, a Gen 3 RX-7, and a Dodge Omni GLHS. Thank you guys for your help. I will talk to all of you guys at 7 o'clock tomorrow.